always answer the question first, right? And what I mean by that is a lot of times a question can be answered with a yes or a no, and then more detail can come, right? If you can answer the question with a simple yes or no, deliver a yes or no, pause, allow the interview to then ask a follow-on question or dig deeper if they need to, a yes or no may do the trick.
All right, so today I am joined by Travis Russell. Travis is currently head of global strategic accounts for Europe, Middle East, Africa, Latin America at LinkedIn's Marketing Solutions Group. And we'll talk about what all that means in a minute. This is Travis's second run at LinkedIn. So he worked in various leadership roles at LinkedIn over the course of about 8 years, from 2008 through 2016. That's when I had the chance to work with Travis. We were there pretty early in the formation of LinkedIn's Marketing Solutions business. In between his first run and his second run at LinkedIn, Travis worked at Oracle, and he worked at a cloud guru. And there he scaled the sales team from 4 people to 125 people. And that played a huge role in the company being acquired for about $2 billion. So Travis has had this amazing career. He's hired and interviewed hundreds of people. And so he's seen the good, the bad, the ugly when it comes to how candidates handle that interview process, the whole hiring process. And so today we want to talk about how you can be a better interview candidate from the perspective of a hiring manager. What to do, what not to do, and not just at places like LinkedIn or Oracle or a cloud guru, but these are principles you can pretty much apply anywhere. And it doesn't matter if you're currently interviewing. You might be interviewing in the next few months or even a few years. And ideally, these are principles you can use at any time. And so it's all about how can you be the best possible job candidate. That's what we're going to talk about today. Travis, once again, thanks so much for being here. It's awesome to see you.
Yeah, man, it's great to see you. Thank you for the intro, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to be reconnected. So let's dive in. Let's talk about what does a head of global strategic accounts at LinkedIn do?
Yeah, so I lead a team of some brilliant managers who have a team of account directors, AEs, and customer success managers that work with LinkedIn's largest global customers. And we help co-create value with those customers to help them scale their businesses from a revenue perspective, and also from a audience perspective, to ensure that they're reaching their current customers or reaching new prospects or driving leads to their sales teams. In general, they're getting the right branding messaging out so that consumers can understand what they're all about, what their positioning is, and where their place is in the market. And so we spend a lot of time with CMOs and some CFOs and anyone across the marketing org, marketing ops, and people like that would drive the marketing strategy and operations that go behind the marketing efforts for any of these large organizations.
Got it. And so you said a few things there that were really, really interesting. So one, you're leading a team of managers, and those managers are hiring and leading teams. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. And so that's an interesting dimension here, because you're involved in both hiring and building that team that reports directly to you. I imagine you're also, though, involved in the hiring process for the people who work for the managers who work for you. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right.
Got it. Okay. And so and this is usually a pretty tricky question, but over the course of your entire career, how many people do you think you've hired?
Oh my gosh.
Take an estimate.
If I had to take a guess, I'd say, I mean, if we, A Cloud Guru, it was roughly around, 100 and something people just with that, yeah. Right? And to interview, the number of interviews to get to a hire sometimes is, you're talking to 10, 12 people, yeah. Right? And so just there, right, you're looking at, 1,000 different interviews and engagements there. And then, so I'd say if I had to put a pin in it, it's somewhere around 1,500, something like that in terms of interviews, and then number of hires, probably a couple hundred.
Got it. Okay, so, yeah. 1,500 interviews. Yeah. So you've seen it all, right? And that's kind of what we want to talk a little bit about today. So, let's say someone wants to join your team at LinkedIn.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about what that process currently looks like? Someone submits an application. What happened?
Yeah. So on LinkedIn, obviously, we have the sort of quick apply option, right, where people are able to submit their LinkedIn profiles, but also a resume or their LinkedIn profile as their resume, which a lot of people prefer to do. And then from there, it goes into an evaluation process, and typically, the first person to see the resume or the CV would be our talent acquisition team, and that talent acquisition team previously has worked very closely with the hiring manager to understand all the attributes that the hiring manager is looking for. They also understand the business very clearly, so that they clearly understand what the objectives of the business are, objectives and responsibilities of the role would be. The hiring manager is responsible for crafting the job description that you would have seen out there, but there's input from the TA partner, and they go through that with a fine-tooth comb to ensure that there's clear understanding of what's being created and what's being asked of the candidate, because they will also be, sourcing and working with our sourcing team to find candidates that fit the job description and the responsibilities that we're looking to achieve in the role. And so they'll review it. Those that stand out because they've articulated very clearly what they did, the impact, the results of what they've done. They've been able to really clearly and concisely share what their greatest skill sets are and what they can bring to the table. They've been able to articulate financials. A lot of it, obviously, what we're looking for is sales roles. So we understand, hey, have you achieved certain rewards or credits within your business because you've achieved quota or overachieved quota? Or if you haven't achieved quota, what was the reason behind that, right? And very clearly and concisely articulating that. And so once they identify a few candidates that fit the job description and fit the responsibilities that we are looking for, they'll present those to the hiring manager, and they'll do a little bit of a round of evaluating and conversation and discussion around, does this candidate really look like a right fit? They'll then have the very first conversation, right? They'll do an entry call, and sort of get a fit for the role, fit for the culture, which culture is really important for us. It's not just fit for role. And they'll get a good sense for that. And then and they've had thousands and thousands of these conversations, so they're, pretty well suited to be able to have a 40 to 45-minute conversation with you, better understand if it's going to be a fit or not. And then the next conversation would be with me, typically as the hiring manager, or if it's someone working directly for one of my managers, the manager would then take that first call. And then there's a series of interviews and a presentation for everyone involved in the hiring process.
Got it. So just to recap there, so there's a talent acquisition team. That team is, they've spent some time with the hiring manager, make sure they really understand the role, the requirements of that role. That helps them understand how will I qualify candidates who are coming in, applications that are being submitted, right? As well as the sourcers, which for folks who are not familiar with that term, those are people who are looking for people who might be a good fit for the job, even if those people haven't applied yet, right? So they might be looking at LinkedIn profiles like, oh, this person seems to have all the right requirements of what we're looking for, and they might reach out. It sounds like maybe before that, though, they're probably checking with you, hey, are these the types of candidates that we should be talking to and reaching out to? As well as, hey, here's some applications we've received. Are these the types of applicants you're looking for, right? It sounds like there's some calibration that happens. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
And there were a few words that you mentioned several times, which I think are really, really worth emphasizing. One, clarity. So you mentioned that several times, like those people who can clearly articulate what they did, or with great clarity talk about the results they delivered. So clarity is one. You talked about being concise, and those two things often go hand in hand, right? How do you keep something digestible, but also make sure that the point is getting across, Easier said than done, but so important, right? Some of the best communicators are able to say things very concisely and very clearly. And then the third thing that you emphasize several times are results, right? What happened because of your activities, right? And so instead of just listing your activities or listing your responsibilities, everybody has responsibilities. Everybody does things. What matters more is what happened because of those activities, right? What results did you deliver? Is that a fair kind of summary of what you shared?
Yeah.
Yeah. Got it. And so the other thing you mentioned is that, hey, that first interview with that recruiter, that person is, very well versed in what we're looking for. They spent a lot of time with the hiring manager. Take that first interview really seriously, right? Because that is going to determine whether you get to that next step, which you mentioned is probably with you or with the hiring manager, right? And so make sure you really show up well prepared for that first conversation. Fair?
Yeah, very fair.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. So during that process, anything that you can share around, what kind of, how do you make sure that first interview, either with you or with the recruiter, goes really well? Anything that say like, look, here's some advice. Here's what you should do. Here's advice like, here's what you should not do. Anything you think is worth people hearing about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's, I have the 3 B's. It's, be concise, as mentioned before, be prepared, and be curious, right? On the concise part is like, deliver what you did, the impact and the results of that, and the role you played specifically. A lot of times people use we a lot in these scenarios, and you're interviewing for a job. I'm going to know what you did. The recruiters want to know what you did and the role you played and the impact of that. And the prepared piece, right? Particularly if you're interviewing for LinkedIn, you can use the tool to get very prepared, to understand who you're interviewing with. And there's no secrets, right? We give you a full understanding of everyone you're going to be meeting. So you've got every opportunity to dig in and sort of better understand who they are and where they've come from. But also be prepared to talk about the company and the products and the tools. You don't need to be an expert on it. We don't expect that. But, come with, an idea of what we're doing and why you'd like to join and why you think you bring value. So be prepared. The curious piece is really important. It is never a good look to show up to an interview and not have really smart questions. For me, it's one of the most glaring examples of someone that isn't really that interested in the role or hasn't really dedicated much time to think about the role of the company. And being curious, being precise, and or being prepared and being concise are also all really 3 things that I think make you good in your job, right? And so if you show up to the interview and you're not doing those things well in the initial interview, you're probably going to create some doubt in the interviewer's mind if you're actually going to be able to effectively deliver in the role.
Yeah.
So those are some things I think you should do.
I love it. The 3 B's. Be concise, be prepared, be curious. On be curious, you used the phrase smart questions. How would you define what's a smart question to ask versus a not so smart question?
Fair. So I think that the people that come in with what I would call smart questions, they're forward-looking questions about where the business is headed, right? Or they're even look-back questions about the business, where the business has been and how that could impact the future state. It's about product-specific things or industry-related things, and how LinkedIn or the company you're interviewing with connect to that industry event or that macro event, right? And it's really sort of that next layer deep versus the real surface level questions about we get a lot of questions at LinkedIn, or I get a lot of questions at LinkedIn around like, hey, what brought you back? Right? Which feels like it's a nice question. but I don't know how it's going to help you do your role. I understand that people may want to know, like, what brought me back? Is it the culture? Is it the leadership? What is it? But don't let that be your only question, right? Layer in other questions. Be more thoughtful about it. Show that you've thought about the business. So that you thought about the product or the industry and understand the macro sort of aspects of what's happening in our world of business.
I think I love that you use be curious instead of just show up with questions, because if you're curious, you're probably going to do a lot of research before the interview, right? Because you're curious, you want to learn as much as you can, and you will probably get to the point where I'm so curious. I've tried to find the answers to all of this stuff. I've looked everywhere. I can't find them. Those are good questions to ask during the interview, right? And that kind of shows your curiosity, right? Like I've seen where Travis has gone. I've read his posts. He explains why he came back. I don't need to ask that question, right? Or I've done enough research that I know what the product does, but I can't find the answer to this one thing. I've looked everywhere for it. I don't understand how they do this. That's a really good, example of curiosity, right? Is do as much research as you can until you can't find the answers that you want to know, and then ask those questions during the interview, right?
Yeah. And, part of the being prepared, too, that I left off is people are going to want examples, right? And so spend some time and really think about the various examples of the things that you really want to articulate, right? Like, if you really want to get a couple points across, think about an example that articulates those points for you, right? Yeah. Again, we can see in your resume that you've done X, Y, and Z, right? But it would be great to understand some examples of how you were able to achieve that. And they don't always have to be home run, amazing examples of big wins. I think some of the biggest learnings come from when we fail. And that also shows vulnerability and some greatness to the hiring manager that, hey, I'm not always, a rock star. I have had some failures, but the important thing is out of the failures I've learned. And here's an example of that.
Yeah. I'd love to touch on the piece it's related to this, where you talked about, some people will come up and they'll talk about what we did. And, you really want to understand, well, what was that person's role in it? And sometimes it can be a little tricky, like, well, how do I make sure I don't come across as like I'm taking credit for everything? Sometimes that will be a flag, right? They don't seem like a team player. Like they seem like it's all about themselves. But then if everything is we, then it's hard to know like what they did. Like any suggestions on how to find the balance there?
Yeah. I think a really good way to find the balance is up front say, look, to deliver this project, I worked with my sales ops team, I worked with my marketing team, and I worked with maybe my product team to get it across. And this is the role that I played in partnership with all of these other teams that were key cross-functional partners to get the job done. And call that out front and then get into what you did specifically, because it gives the interviewer then an understanding of, hey, they worked with cross-functional partners, they understand how to bring the team together to accomplish a goal, but then it gives them the opportunity to hear what you did specifically, and then go back and ask additional questions on how did you bring that team together? How did you bring product and sales ops and marketing all together to achieve this, right? So giving that upfront knowledge of who all played a role, and then still being able to articulate your specific impact is how I would approach it.
Love it. That's a great way. In that case, you are both acknowledging that, hey, it wasn't a single superhero effort. It required a team to do it. Here's what everyone else did. Here's the part I played. And that probably finds the right balance, right? Like, hey, I'm showcasing what I did, but I'm also not taking all the credit. Love it. And on concise, what general guidance there? I've had some situations where a candidate will answer one question and they'll take a really long time, and it doesn't leave any time to get to the other questions, which can be unfortunate because you don't know how many opportunities you'll have. Any suggestions or guidance on, when you say be concise, how candidates can put that to work?
Yeah, always answer the question first, right? And what I mean by that is a lot of times a question can be answered with a yes or a no, and then more detail can come, right? If you can answer the question with a simple yes or no, deliver a yes or no, pause, allow the interview to then ask a follow-on question or dig deeper if they need to. A yes or no may do the trick in some cases. So don't automatically think that you need to provide, layers and layers of detail. Give the interviewer the opportunity to ask you further questions should they require additional information. That's one trick. The other piece is be prepared.
Yeah.
Right? Spend some time, practice. Like, it's similar to delivering a speech if you were on stage or delivering a presentation to a client. Practice. If you're timing yourself and you know that the interview is 45 minutes and you've got to get these points across, you want to be really smart and make sure that there's time for all of that to happen so that you can leave the best impression. Because if you only get one question across, or the interviewer only gets one question across, you've left yourself out to, you've left yourself in a bad position to be able to probably move forward.
Yeah, it's a good point. Typically what happens, and we'll talk about kind of the interview loop or panel, whatever we're calling it, but usually there's some kind of summary that is delivered after the interview, right? The hiring manager shares it with the rest of the hiring team. Here's what happened, and when you say like, but we didn't have a chance to get to all this other stuff, so I don't have answers. I don't know how to talk about if the candidate has strengths in these areas or if they have the skills we need because we didn't have a chance to get to it. That's usually not going to work in the candidate's favor, right? So, cool. Let's talk about the rest of it. So let's say they're really concise. They do a great job of talking about the work they did, the results they delivered, and they've really asked some thoughtful questions of you. What happens next? You mentioned there's perhaps an interview panel committee or.
So then they would go on to the next round of interview, which for us, we try and keep the candidate in mind and avoid having 5-6 interviews for the candidate because it can just delay things, and it's really tough on a candidate to have that many rounds of interviews. And so in some cases, we'll have a cultural interview with the team. So it allows both the candidate and the team that they'd be working directly with to sort of get a feel for how they would gel with the team, and allows the candidate to ask someone that's in that role what their day-to-day activities are like, right? What does it really look like on a day-to-day? What does your day-to-day look like? What would I be responsible for? How do you divide your time? That type of stuff. In some cases, that's not required, and so we'll move directly to a presentation round, right? And this happens for managers. It also happens for the individual contributors that be coming in on the sales team. The presentation can be one of a couple different prompts that we've built out with our TA partners and our managers, and allows the person to display their ability to articulate a story and share more about themselves, and how do they manage a room, and how do they engage with people in a presentation round. And it's a panel, so you'll have 3 people from various aspects of the business sitting around a table or on video listening to the presentation. We ask the presentation come as a pre-read the day before, allow all of the panel to have a pre-read, get comfortable with it. And the nice thing for the candidates, and this is something again about being curious, like before and during the interview, is we give you the opportunity to ask loads of questions about the prompt that we're giving you. We want you to show up and deliver your best self on that day, and we want to give you the opportunity to ask as many questions. And it's a shame when we give you that opportunity to ask all these questions through the TA partner that can come directly to us and get you all the answers you need, and people don't ask questions, and then they don't do very well in the presentation, right? And it's a missed opportunity for people, I feel. But we have that opportunity and provide that opportunity and pure transparency of how the process is going to work, because we, again, want people to show up and be their best selves on that day. And then after the panel interview, we have a sort of roundtable meeting with TA and everyone after they've entered their feedback into our tool that we use to collect feedback on candidates and track candidate performance. And then we all come together and sort of have a discussion on, is this the candidate for the role? What were the strengths? What were the growth opportunities? We also look at ourselves to determine, could we have done anything different to make the candidate experience better, right? Was the prompt right for this candidate? Was there anything that we could have done better? Because we don't always assume that an interview goes poorly and it's all on the candidate, right? There's certainly opportunity for us to always be improving the process on our end as well.
So, after you, there might be a set of interviews with a few other people on the hiring team. Then there's the panel and the presentation, right? And then there's a recap where that hiring team gets together and talks about kind of in aggregate everything they've seen so far. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. On that middle leg there, meeting with the individual interviewers, any guidance beyond be concise, be prepared, be curious, anything else that you think is good for people to know about that part of the process?
Yeah, I think that is one of the most important pieces of it, because you really get an opportunity to meet someone that you'd be working closely with and that has been in the role for a decent amount of time typically. And so that's one of those things where any questions that you haven't asked of the hiring manager, this is your opportunity to really dig in and get into the nitty gritty, as they say, right? And so I think that some people may take it as almost like a given or an easy next step. But if you invest some time in that and really think about, hey, what do I really need to know about this role? Like, what's going to make me happy in this role, or what's going to make me miserable in this role? And I think sussing that out in that conversation is a really big benefit to the candidate and should be taken advantage of.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're right. I've seen some candidates who really take that part of the process very seriously, and some others who it almost seems as if they thought, oh, this is just checking some boxes. Hiring managers are often, your reputation is built on who you hire. And as a result, a lot of hiring managers can be pretty risk averse. And so if a lot of other people on the panel are saying, like, I'm not sure we should hire this person, a lot of hiring managers will take a lot of signal from that, right? And the reverse is true too. Wow, we should hire this person right away. That gives the hiring manager so much more confidence, right? They're like, okay, great. Like, we are all seeing something special here. And that makes me feel much more comfortable. I'm not taking a big risk here, right? In hiring this person. So take that part really seriously. And anything around like how people can manage that part of the process outside of the interviews, anything around like, what good follow-up looks like, or what not to do when it comes to follow-up, or how, anything they can do to keep the process moving forward.
Yeah, I think, depending on where you are in the world, follow-up notes are either a must-do or, a nice-to-have, but not really frowned upon if they don't come, right?
Yeah.
In the UK, it's certainly it's something you would anticipate and expect from a candidate. In the US, it's definitely something that you would expect. And in the UK and the US, on those follow-up notes, in a way to continue to stay relevant is, don't just thank people for their time. Don't just say, hey, I appreciated meeting you. Recap a bit of what happened in the interview and the pieces that you really want to make sure that they take away. And it's also a good opportunity sometimes to share a point of view on something that you didn't share in the interview, right? Something that you could say, hey, we didn't have a chance to chat about this, but something I've been thinking about related to your business is X, Y, or Z. And you can also share an article or something that you've seen that was relevant and timely to either the business or the industry or something like that, to again show that you're thinking about the business and you're really thoughtful. Remember that these interviewers are probably having a number of interviews, right? And similar to like having a client meeting, clients are having a whole bunch of meetings with a whole bunch of reps, and it's on you to ensure that your message cuts through, that your interview cuts through, that your points are delivered. And the follow-up note can be one of the best ways to do that, and it can also be a really great way for candidates to stand out, particularly if you're able to really articulate and communicate very effectively through that note.
Love it. one way to think about it is how do my three big communication pieces, my resume, my interview, and then my follow-up and communication during the process, how do those all work together in harmony, right? And not just repeating themselves, but building on themselves, right? Some repetition is important. If you want certain themes to be coming through, you want those themes there, but the way you articulate them, the way you illustrate them, can be different in each way given the different medium, and add some additional things on there, right? Like to your point, hey, I saw this other article, anything you can share about it. So it sounds like, hey, do the follow-up, send the notes. That in of itself will set you apart from some candidates who don't. And then, but also, like, don't just thank them for the time, add some value, repeat some of the themes that you've talked about during your conversations, and perhaps ask a few more questions, show that you're thinking about the business and the opportunity in a thoughtful way, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And, I also find that it's great to reach out to the TA lead that you've been working with and being very kind and thoughtful in that outreach as well. But also going back to the hiring manager if you haven't heard anything, right? Don't just rely on TA. Take ownership of the situation and, look for answers and continue to show interest because that will go a long way.
Awesome. Travis, this has been great. Thank you so much for sharing all that insight. I learned a ton. If someone wants to come work for you, what's the best way for them to do that? If they want to follow what you're up to, what's the best way for them to find and interact with you?
Yeah, ping me on LinkedIn, right? And drop me a note on LinkedIn. Share with me the job that you're interested in. That's also one of the things that I find entertaining is when people, reach out and say they want to work at LinkedIn, but don't share what specifically they're interested in, which role they want, or even which line of business they're interested in. Yeah. Take initiative, own the process.
Yeah. Awesome. Travis, thank you so much for your time. I hope we get to do this again sometime because, man, you have so much wisdom to share, and I know that everyone watching this is going to get so much, and they're going to be a better interview candidate because of it. So thanks so much for the time. Looking forward to doing it again sometime.
Thanks, Steve. It was great.
Thanks for watching. I hope that was helpful. If it was, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything, but it does help the channel. And hit that little bell notification so that you get notified when we post more tips from real hiring managers. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.